of all of what other countries have emitted. So you can see a bit of that chart on your right-hand side there. The problem though is that although Africa has contributed the least, unfortunately it's also the one that is suffering the most from climate change. And of course, then the issue of who should pay for it becomes quite, pertinent. But within the continent also, we have bigger issues of energy poverty, bigger issues of the need to industrialize, and the issue of sort of ensuring that there's overall sustainable economic growth across the continent. And interestingly, when you unpack the data a little bit, one of the key indicators that often would use to measure how economies broadly are growing is to take the overall emissions and then divide by the population size, so the emissions per capita. And if you take Africa's CO2 emissions per capita, since the last 30 or so years, they have barely moved, right? So this is even considering the fact that the population on the continent has increased by twofold. And what this indicates really is that we still have pervasive issues of energy poverty on the continent. And with the exception of South Africa, so South Africa is always a bit of an outlier, and you will see that soon. South Africa's emissions per capita is almost at the same level as China and some of the other OECD countries. But in many other African countries, it's barely going above the 2 threshold. Others are doing 7 and the rest. But the point here is that for many African governments and countries, the imperative and the priority is to reduce the energy deficit and also to industrialize. And to that extent, they want to leverage whatever resource that they have at their disposal. The forestry and agriculture area, technically called land use change and forestry, which is about 36% or so. And then the energy sector accounts for another 35% of the emissions. So what this would tell you, or the implication of this then would be, any money or financing coming in would, in theory, should be going into these areas per the proportions that you see. Isn't that the case? That you would, if I had 100 million, for example, to give, then I would expect maybe 36 million of that money going into land use change and forestry, which is mostly adaptation related funding, and then maybe another 35 million going into the energy sector. However, when you see the numbers, this hasn't been the case on the continent. So you see a lot of money going into, for example, mitigation, and even those monies that are coming in, again, comes with strings attached, in the sense that they are often loan or commercial arrangements, which then can exacerbate the fiscal risk of many African governments. But this is to tell a story, and the story is that what the breakdown of the emissions within the continent has been, and where the money has come and where it's going to, there seems to be, or there is actually a mismatch within that. Yeah, you have a 250 billion a year need, and you're getting 30 billion coming in. If you work the math, that's just about 7%, right, of that. So clearly, at this current trajectory, we wouldn't be able to implement the NDCs on the continent. And again, something must change about that. And this is what I just said is what I'm showing here on this chart. And if you break this further down, into the different segments or sectors, you can see that most of the money is coming in often in the form of various debt instruments.
Where we have energy poor people, we are not industrialized. We need energy, oil and gas, electricity to advance our development. At the same time, there is a global call for climate action to reduce our impact on the climate so that we can save the future generations. Balancing these difficulties has become very challenging for the African government, and therefore there is a call from some quarters that at least they should allow us to produce our oil to get the revenue to be able to finance our climate actions, and at the same time receive funding from those who have polluted the climate much more over the past centuries. These are important conversations, but there are realities that we have to also pay attention to. Beyond the concern that we may not be able to produce our oil and gas and therefore it will be stranded, how do we ensure that the new evolution and technology that are evolving to address the climate action, we are not actually left behind. Those are concerns that we need to really support governments to think through and process them really well. There are countries who are participating in the climate action who are producing far more oil and gas than we do. I mean, US is producing about 11 million barrels of oil per day. Ghana is doing about 160,000 barrels. Norway is transitioning by 2025. And they are doing about 2 million barrels of oil per day. So these are significant producers who still see the need for climate action. But what we also find is that even though African governments are asking for investment, we are showing a lot of capacity to actually access those funds where they are available. The conditionalities around them, we are not really prepared. Oil and gas will still be relevant. But the fundamental worry is that oil companies are also becoming energy companies. They are also exploring opportunities, economic opportunities in the renewable space. So if you're only talking and hoping that you will get all the investment to produce your oil and gas, it may not come. And therefore the need for us to also adjust and look at the opportunities in the renewable space so that we are not left behind when the world actually transitions. And that is the worry that we have. So we have to look for the funding where available, but most crucially, we have to think through the options domestically to be participants of the energy transition in research and development. We need to also sell technology to the world, not just wait for the West to sell technology to us tomorrow when the transition actually happens. If you look at the renewables space, we are already importing the panels, we are already importing the batteries. All right, for how long will that continue? Can we tie in our resources? We are producing bauxite, we are producing lithium, and all of these are given away as concessions to Western and external companies. We will end up not having even these resources in the next couple of years if we don't have a holistic plan to integrate that into the renewable agenda.
Sikana yenyano enso. Oshenia amaino akase umuhia to fight climate change compared to near eba inside na there's a vast difference. Just African yenyano on average umuhia $250 billion. Now we in the last couple of years near yenya has been about 30 billion to 30 billion compared to 250 billion. That's a big gap, almost like 80-something%. And only number one, but the same will say, Uba, Amayamani Mua, Zambia, South Africa, and Ghana. But Uba, there are issues that is preventing companies no more years more on the ground from accessing the finance. Even he said, to me, put it together project documents to justify Jumana or some of the year. If you say we share government agencies now, we are responsible for climate implementation. Almost said that and casa enough, so there's not enough coordination happening on the ground. We highlighted and raised it in the report.